Hello and welcome to AXSchat. This week we're delighted to welcome Molly Watt with us as our guest. Molly is very well known within the UK for being an Usher syndrome advocate and also technology enthusiast and blogger. So welcome, Molly.
Yeah.
I've been interacting with you on Twitter for the last couple of years. It's great to actually virtually meet you face to face.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Brilliant. We have this kind of technology, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so. Thank you for joining us. So obviously I'm aware of your story, but some of our viewers won't be. So can you tell us a bit about how you came to be into accessibility? Obviously you have ushers, but give us a bit of background.
Sure. So I have Usher syndrome, which means I was born deaf, and then later on during adolescence, I along came the onset of blindness. So retinitis pigmentosa is a progressive form of blindness. So being deaf as well as blind during education was really quite a struggle without the right tools. So I really my passion for technology these days is because I've had to strategize with the tools, and now through my own experiences I will talk and consult on how they could be made better or more accessible to more end users. So really it's just as a result of quite a lot of bad experiences, I'd say, in education and getting a job and things like that. I'm quite passionate about if one has the right tools, they can do anything, because that's really how I managed to achieve my GCSEs, my A levels, and even get into university. However, I think it was just my calling, really, just to come out and actually try and help other people, to really not to prevent them from experiencing the same experiences I had with the whole lack of accessibility. I really do feel that with the right tools that everyone can succeed. So that's why I'm quite passionate about technology, accessibility, and assistive technology. So yeah, that's really just the basis of it.
Okay, and you make no secret of being a big Apple fan.
Yes. I mean, I try not to be biased because I know there are other bits of gadgetry that aren't Apple, but since I was diagnosed, which was 10 years ago, so I'm 22 now, I was 12 when I first got diagnosed with Usher syndrome, and I became aware of Apple back then because I had a friend whose mum who worked at Apple, and because she knew what I was going through or my recent diagnosis, she, in a subtle way, started showing me some accessibility features on their Macs and iPhones, things like that. And I've been quite fortunate that my parents they were in a position to be able to afford a MacBook, or for me to access my education. And had it not have been for this MacBook with the built-in accessibility, there's just no way I would have been able to access my education. And I think because it's now been 10 years and all I've used is Apple, that's what I'm familiar with. So I'm personally, I rely on my Apple products, all from MacBook, iPhone to Apple Watch. I couldn't be without it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're now within an ecosystem, and it is a very accessible ecosystem that Apple have created. And
Yes.
um, the biggest rub comes when you step outside of that ecosystem, or you're trying to use those integrated tools with other people's products, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so that's really where the world of accessibility kind of broadens, because the fact that there is this flexibility and compatibility with other assistive technologies, which is what I'm learning, because I know a lot of people are like, oh no, Apple is not very compatible with other things, blah, blah, blah. However, for me, I found, say, my hearing aids, for example, the fact that they're compatible with the Apple Watch and the iPhone, that has enabled me so much more accessibility. So, for example, I can now take a phone call, which I haven't been able to do before without these hearing aids. And now, so all the technology that's available for blind people, assistive technology, is now accessible for the deafblind, like myself, with these hearing aids. And that's all because of the compatibility with my Apple products. So had I not been offered to trial these hearing aids, I wouldn't be able to have this call with you right now. So yeah, it's definitely, and this is all in the last year and a half where I've really been starting to experience things a lot more now that I've got these hearing aids. And it helps me with my company and the way I communicate with people also, especially with the fact that I'm dually impaired. So my sight, I've only got 5 degrees vision. So having these hearing aids that can connect to all the different gadgetries just makes the world so much easier for me.
So tell us a little bit about your hearing aids, and then I'll let Antonio ask a question because I know he has one.
Sure. So these hearing aids are called GN Resound Link Squared hearing aids. So I found out about these hearing aids through my Apple Watch blog. So I blog extensively about technology, and around the time, as far as I'm aware, these hearing aids are the first to pair with iPhone and Apple Watch. I know that's not the case anymore. Some of the other ones are doing that now. However, through this blog, this company got in contact with me through Twitter, which is brilliant. And it was kind of just agreed for me to trial these hearing aids, and for me to tell them about my experiences with the watch and the phone with the hearing aid. And so basically with these hearing aids, they connect through Bluetooth on my iPhone, my Apple Watch. They come with an app. So on my phone and on my watch, I can adjust the bass, treble, volume. There's also programs as well. So depending on the environment, say for example, one program is called Restaurant. So say if I'm in a busy restaurant and I'm trying to focus on one person in front of me, I can press the Restaurant program, and what it does, it reduces background noise and it focuses on the person in front of me. So it's just one quick, literally I can just flick up on my watch and tap the program, and it will just change it like that. Before, in my other hearing aids, I would have had to gone to an audiologist to get them to install the programs onto my hearing aid. So that it was possible, but it was fiddly. Whereas these hearing aids, having the app where I can manually adjust my own hearing, is amazing. They also, the actual quality of the hearing aid itself without the app, I mean, the app is a bonus, but the actual quality of sound for these hearing aids in comparison to hearing aids I've had before is massive. So, for example, with these hearing aids, I can now locate sound. Before, when I had digital hearing aids, I could always hear sound, but I never knew where they were coming from. So for someone with limited sight like myself, hearing sounds or hearing someone talking to me, I would be scanning around to find this person, which is very tiring. Whereas with these hearing aids, if someone's talking to me from the other side of the room on my right side, I'll be able to know, oh, they're on my right, and I'll turn to them. It's also a safety aspect. So if I'm out and about, there's cars around, I have an idea of where cars are or how far that danger is away from me. So again, being deafblind, this is huge. I didn't have that before. So yeah, that's really the gist of these hearing aids. They're pretty cool.
They sound amazing.
So, Mol, I know that in your blog you try to talk about these stories about your journey and about technology. Can you tell us a bit about the how people react to your stories and to your conversations on Twitter when you are talking about your own personal experiences?
So through the charity that I have, I find that blogging really helps other people to relate to experiences, and they often think, oh, actually, if I had this, if I had, say, the Apple Watch, for example, I'd have more independence. I'd be able to do this. I'd be able to do that. There's a lot of people with Usher syndrome specifically, or in various different, disabilities out there that feel isolated. And the reason they feel isolated is because they don't have the confidence to leave the house and do things by themselves. And what I blog about are technology that can make a difference, that can actually make you feel confident enough to leave the house and can give you the independence without, having to rely on people, which a lot of people with disabilities have to without the right tools. So often the feedback I get is quite positive in that way. People are like, wow, given me an insight to how different life could be, and that actually it is possible. So that is kind of that. And we also, at our charity, we encourage other people to write blogs of their own experiences as well, just to tell people that actually that you're not alone, and that we all go through similar situations that are quite a struggle. But, you know, with the right help and tools and support, you know, you can get there. So that's really why I blog. I just blog to raise awareness, and you know, it's great that people can read and actually relate to it and find and seek some confidence out of it as well, to be able to go out there and do more of the same.
We know that you have been traveling, and you are also doing a lot of keynote speaking. You have been in the States quite recently. When you go out there and you start talking about disabilities, and you end up talking about diversity, do they still get surprised about this type of conversation? How they react? Are people able to answer your question directly, or they say, "Oh, Molly, can I talk with you in private? Can we have this type of chat?" Can you tell us about those reactions?
I do really enjoy. This is the one part I do enjoy about it, because there's still a lot of stereotypes out there about deafness, blindness, or deaf blindness. You know, I vary my talks depending on the audience, and sometimes what I do is I go out there and I speak about myself, my achievements, what I've done in life, and then at the very end I'll say, "Oh yes, and I've got Usher syndrome, which means I'm deaf blind." And the reactions I get are like, "Sorry?" And it's kind of like, well, hang on a minute, so you're actually deafblind, but you've been able to do all these things. And it's like, well, yes, you know, I can succeed with the right. And then I'll go into everything into more detail as to how I got to where I am. So I do enjoy when I do my talking, and I'm raising awareness of the abilities of what we can do rather than what we can't do. You know, for people with all kinds of disabilities. Obviously, I specialise in sensory impairment because of my own experiences, but there are still a lot of there's a lot of ignorance still out there about sensory impairments. You know, people think that if I'm deaf, I sign or I can't speak, and if I'm blind, I can't see a thing, which is it's just still like, that's just, you know, that's living in the dark ages. So I will, you know, talk to them about, you know, the different levels of everything and how the impact of technology make a difference to this also. For example, my introduction to hearing aids at such a young age meant that I had access to speech and speech therapy. That's why I speak the way I do now. Whereas not all deaf people had that same growing up. You know, some people chose to sign, and some people didn't get hearing aids or cochlear implants till later on in life, so their speech is more impaired. So it really does depend. And really now, in this day and age, more people are likely to be given hearing aids sooner, and therefore have access to sound sooner, and therefore have speech as good as mine. So that kind of ignorance with the whole deafness thing is still out there, but I do my best to you know, prevent that. And also with the blindness, you know, not all blind people use screen readers. Not all blind people rely on voiceover. Ironically, I'm so visual because I was born deaf, and I do still have that bit of sight. I use it a lot. I'm still really visual, though I get really tired using it. I'm still more inclined to use my sight and, you know, my hearing aids than to sit and listen to a book. I can't do that because naturally I'm still using my eyes. They're just telling me to work all the time. So yeah, so in answer to what you were saying, when I do my talks, I talk about all these things, and I do love like assessing the reactions I get. I always encourage people to ask me questions because I would rather someone ask me the question than assumed. Because that's one thing that was difficult growing up. You know, people just assumed what I needed when actually it wasn't the case until they listened to what I had to say. And it just makes a whole lot of difference for someone to just ask me the question. So yes, most of the time they ask questions openly at the end, and I'm always more than happy to answer them, no matter how silly they might be. But then there are still some people that may well just want to pull me to the side at the end and say, "Oh, you know, do you mind if I ask you this question?" Or, "You know, you were saying," and they would ask me to answer it more in depth. than I did in front of everyone else. So yeah, it's always an interesting one, traveling around doing all these talks to various different audiences. However, a lot of the questions tend to be quite similar, because everyone's just curious. I'd rather they just ask the question rather than just assume. That's one thing I aim for, people to ask me questions.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people who are visually impaired, quite a few people who have RP as well,
Yeah.
who are equally like you, very much visual, and you're right, it's a common mistake that people make with visual impairments, that people won't use their sight, whereas actually most people really want to use what's left of it. I think that one of my bugbears is that we see a lot of assistive technologies that look awful,
Yes.
because no care and attention's been paid to how things look and feel, and yet people still have a sense of aesthetics. So that annoys me. I won't pretend otherwise, but equally, you like to give input to other people's products.
Yes.
And I know you have a few favorites, Facebook being one.
Yeah, I think one thing that surprises people, although we speak of a lot of assistive technology,
Yeah.
but a lot of what I use is mainstream technology that helps me, and with the right features on there or the right apps or anything like that, can really go a long way. And so it really does irritate me when, say, one like myself using a MacBook with perfectly good accessibility, when I get onto, say, a website that isn't accessible, it's just appalling, because even though I'm using all the features that I've got, this website isn't built for the accessibility features. And that shouldn't be the case. These developers should be building these things with accessibility in mind for all people. Because when you think that 1 in 5 people have some disability of some kind, you would think that they would think of this. Facebook being one, social networking is so crucial, so important for people in isolation. And you could be in any kind of walk in life and be isolated. I personally have been isolated, and I know many people with the same condition that have been isolated, and it's a horrible burden. And having a social network that you can access to reach out and talk to someone is massively important, and that's why I was just so passionate about changing Facebook and trying to get them to change their ways, because it's such a huge website that everyone uses, and there's so many groups and things on there where people actually have the confidence to speak out and ask a question about their condition, and it's good that people are doing that. But for the people that can't access it, and there's a lot of them, or can't afford these assistive technologies in order to access them better, they're isolated, and it's just not right. It shouldn't be happening, but it still does.
It's very tough. So I'm a big fan of social media, and I'm totally with you about the importance of social networks to decrease isolation. You got virtual networks and virtual support through social media that particularly people with disabilities who may not get out as much, or may not feel comfortable socializing in other ways, are really reliant on. And so social media is hugely important. But equally, I know from working in a very large organization that despite the will from the top, often things are disjointed, and Facebook's very disjointed, but you can just see the interface. It confuses me, because there's lots and lots of things going on, but it does feel like with the constant changes that that you're never in a sort of stable state. So, and again, if you have a disability, if you have a cognitive disability like me, or you rely on assistive technologies, you kind of want to know where stuff is.
Yes.
You know, so this constant moving of the interface is problematic. Even if it is made accessible, the weight of the change that is put upon you is quite significant. So I think that the companies you know, that are doing this don't really quite understand the effect that it has on people.
No. And
But
really, how much it would improve an individual's life if it was just appropriate to everyone and it wasn't changing so dramatically all the time. You know, things would be made a lot easier, not just for one group of people, for everyone. You know, what helps one tends to help everyone in a roundabout way. You know, these social networks like LinkedIn as well, for example. So that's a platform for you know, well, your work, your jobs, your past jobs, things like that. For someone who is academic and wants a job, but has struggled to get a job because of the ignorance, or because they're because of the ignorance and lack of confidence, social media could have prevented that by just making it more accessible for more people to join and more people to connect with other people. I mean, going back to the Facebook thing, I mean, I was invited to go and speak to them, but they refused to help me get over there or to pay me a fee to advise them on their accessibility, which really got me. It really irritated me, and I said, okay, you know, if you don't want to pay me, at least could you give a donation to my charity? No, we won't, they said. Which I just thought was such a shame, because, you know, they acknowledged that they needed someone to come in and to speak to them about accessibility, about how to prevent all these struggles for so many people, but then they refused to pay for it. Because you know, one's got to get by, one's got to get there somehow, and they didn't want to help in any way, which really
so I think this is an interesting one, because again, this is something that's a recurring theme within accessibility. Accessibility isn't a charity.
no.
And if you were to say, oh, I found a problem with the security of your website and I've got the answers for you, you wouldn't expect that company to expect you to come in and do it for free.
No.
So why is it with accessibility that organizations expect people that are involved in the field to do it for free? And I think it should always be an element of, you know, making sure that you're paid for your time and your expertise and everything else, because companies also don't value what they don't pay for. If they're getting it for free, then they don't really care about it that much. If they've had to pay for it, then the fact that they've had to pay for it means that they're going to pay more attention to it. And it's difficult because you get yourself into this catch-22 situation where you're saying, pay me because it's professional advice and everything else, and they're saying, but we just want to get it right. And again, quite often what you're dealing with is people in these large organizations that don't have control over their own budgets and everything else. So then it becomes a case of the difficulty that an individual has in dealing with the bureaucracy of large organizations. So in some ways, it's much easier for small companies to become accessible than big ones with huge resources, because despite the fact that they have huge resources, they also have huge bureaucracy and huge I'm trying to think of the right word, friction, because it effectively it takes a long time before you build up that momentum. I think that things will change.
I think so too. I think eventually, I find it incredible that big companies like this don't seem to understand that if they did consider these things, more people would use it. So essentially it benefits them in the end. You know, it would be a much wider platform to many more people if it was accessible. And that's why, you know, arguably, I've always said with the work I have done with web and app developers, that accessibility should be included right at the beginning before the build up process. And that's why, I mean, this is why I understand it's so much harder once you've got, let's say, where Facebook are concerned. It's kind of hard to kind of backtrack and rebuild with accessibility. But it just amazes me that no one considers this right at the beginning. Yeah, so
no, it's tough,
Yeah.
but I'm with you, and I'll let you in a second, Antonio, because I've been hogging it a bit. But effectively, they work in an iterative way. The word I was searching for was inertia. Effectively, yeah, they have inertia in these large companies, and once you overcome that, I think you will get progress. But effectively, they can. As they introduce new things, if they've got accessibility into the requirements as they start building, then you can start to make that kind of progress.
sure, yeah, definitely.
Go for it, Antonio.
No, I was talking with a friend over the weekend. He has he's trying to create an app, and his startup is based on referrals, so job referrals. And I end up showing him Molly's website, because because he wants to bring and create a place where people can apply for a job and they can refer others. So if somebody is working in an area of employment, it's extremely important that they're able to build something that is accessible, where they can refer everyone,
Yes.
independent from what they might need or might not need. And it's interesting, if you have just a small conversation with someone and you show them a few features, they realize, oh, this is not just easy to introduce, but it's actually very cool
Yeah.
to have this feature on the very side. So people realize, okay, this is really nice. And you were mentioning LinkedIn, and there's two sides of the social network. One is the fact that a person needs to have a place where they can add their details about their professional details. And then there's this well-known aspect that when a recruiter is looking for employees or for talent, they go to LinkedIn. So they do a search and they end up restricting their search to the pool of people that are going to be visible for them when they play with the keywords. So if someone with disability is not able to be as active or is able to go to that journey into having a decent profile, they will be completely out of the search engine. So we are restricting them the access in two ways. One, they are not able to be confident and build their profiles there. And then on the other end, you are restricting them from being visible to someone looking to hire talent in LinkedIn. And considering that we are always, in search for talent with people in the areas of technology and many others, it doesn't make any sense to have this type of behavior anymore.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
So we know that LinkedIn obviously have accessibility champion within their organization. It's Jenison Asuncion, and Jenison does great stuff, but equally the role of an accessibility person is quite a lonely one within these large organizations. And again, some of the difficulty for the accessibility guy is to actually get themselves on the radar of the people that are making the decisions, and that's tricky. I've been there. It takes a long time to sort of go from the point where you've entered into the organization and the organization's made the choice to bring in the accessibility guy, to that being embedded into the way that they do their the way that they do their work and their practice and everything else. That's a long journey. I've been walking that road for 6 years now in my particular employer, and we've got a long way still to go, but we've made progress. So
Sure.
some of the things that we have done, we're training people on accessibility. We've set up apprenticeship schemes to create the next generation of accessibility professionals. We've created standards. The issues don't go away when you've created standards, because people still have to adhere to them. and you need to be able to point them to them. And in an organization with 100,000 people and you know, millions of projects, how do you do that? So some of that is always going to be an issue, but
Sure.
the more you talk about it, the more you educate people, the more people become champions, and you create networks of champions.
Yeah.
The more the good word spreads, and the more people do stuff. And I think that the BBC have got are a great example of this, where what they did, they created a champions network. They don't have a huge accessibility team, but they do have a very accessible range of products.
They do, yes.
You know, not everything's accessible, but a lot of their products are very accessible, and they generally do a good job. And one of the reasons they do a good job is that they've infused the overall working population of the organization and enabled them to take responsibility. And it's not just the responsibility of the accessibility guy sat in the back room somewhere. You have accessibility champions throughout the business, and the accessibility team effectively just acts as the central point to look at new stuff and thorny problems, and look at new ways that you could do even better,
Yeah.
rather than firefighting the whole time.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I mean, BBC, I did a talk there earlier this year, and they, it was basically a group of accessibility champions, and they were all just very open-minded, which is really all I could ask for, really, from where I was coming from. I mean, there was a group of presentations from all different kinds of people, all talking about accessibility, but all in different departments. And then we all broke down into smaller groups, where they, asked more specific questions. And I was made aware of quite a lot of the projects they had going on at BBC, and that was a really good productive day, I think, at BBC. I was glad I got to go and see them, and for them to ask me questions also. They were interested and they were listening, and that was all I could really ask for. So that was great.
I think I can't let you go without talking about not. So we've been talking about social media and how important it is. Can you give us very briefly a few suggestions how people can be productive using social media and how you use it in your life, just to open sometimes to open some new ideas for some of the people that might be listening to us or watching us?
What do you mean as in when using the social media sites, or when creating them? What?
Or no, when you need to research, get yourself more informed with information in many different areas, how
Sure.
you use social media to improve yourself, to develop yourself as someone that is passionate and someone that works in the area of accessibility.
I think social networks, for me, has been key to get the awareness out there, and spreading the awareness like constantly, and really just I mean, for me personally, it's that communication aid as well, being able to just go online and reach out and speak to someone, especially for those who are isolated. Social media, you can have access on any device, which is great. So there's all these different platforms and options for social media. So having it so user friendly that that anyone can just jump on and speak to someone. I love the fact that you can share all kinds of bits of information, either from accessible websites or for other people to put it on there so that it is accessible for other people. I like the flexibility in that. I also like the idea of being able to share ideas and opinions, also sharing experiences and how, or even just reviews, to encourage better experiences for everyone. There's all sorts of, I use it. I mean, my blogging also goes on social media, again, for the reasons that I spoke of before. And it essentially bring people together, and that's what really at the Molly Watt Trust we aim to do. And so social media is such a massive part of that. Without social media, there's no way we would have been able to do the last 3 or 4 annual events at the Molly Watt Trust, bringing all people from everywhere together. There's no way we would have been able to do it without it. So when all's said and done, it is such a powerful thing for us all to have access to, and it makes such a big difference to an individual's life.
Thank you. I think we're at the end of our half hour now, Molly. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
It goes pretty quick, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So look, we look forward to you joining us on Twitter tomorrow night. I'm sure it will be a really lively chat.
Yes, yeah, look forward to it.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Molly.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.